5 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my entire world cracked open. My name is Emily Parker. I was 31 years old, standing in a bridal suite inside a historic wedding venue in Charleston, South Carolina. My dress was on. My veil was pinned into place. My bouquet was resting on the table beside me. Outside the door, nearly 200 guests were waiting for the ceremony to begin. And then my phone rang. At first, I ignored it. I thought it was another bridesmaid checking on me or someone asking where to sit. I wanted one quiet moment before marrying the man I loved. Then I saw the name on the screen. Olivia. My older sister. Something inside me tightened immediately. I answered anyway. The moment I said hello, she laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not a nervous laugh. The kind of laugh someone makes when they already know they have one. "Do not wait for Dad," she said. I froze. "What are you talking about?" She sighed dramatically. "He chose to stay with me." For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. Today, right now, 5 minutes before my wedding, my father was not coming. My knees felt weak. I sat down on the edge of the chair and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Why would he do that? Olivia did not hesitate. Because somebody needed to remind you that the world does not revolve around you. Then she hung up.
Just like that. No explanation. No apology.
Nothing. The room felt strangely silent. I looked at myself in the mirror, dressed like a bride, but suddenly feeling like the forgotten daughter I had spent my entire childhood trying not to be. Every missed birthday, every broken promise, every school event where I searched the crowd for my father and found an empty seat instead. All of it came rushing back. I thought I was about to walk into that ceremony alone. I thought everyone would watch me searching for the father who had chosen not to show up. But I was wrong. Because less than 60 seconds later, someone opened the bridal suite door. And the person standing there was about to change everything. The woman standing in the doorway was Margaret Collins. Most people knew her as the retired principal from Lincoln Middle
School.
I knew her as the person who had shown up for me more times than my own family. She took one look at my face and immediately closed the door behind her. What happened? I tried to answer, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I handed her my phone. She read the call log. Then she looked at me. "Olivia," I nodded. "And Dad." Margaret sighed slowly. That told her everything. The painful truth was that this was not unusual. Not really. My father had been choosing Olivia over me for as long as I could remember. When we were kids, Olivia was the center of every room. If she was happy, everyone relaxed. If she was upset, the entire family rushed to fix it. Birthdays became about her feelings. Vacations revolved around her preferences. Family dinners changed depending on her mood. And somehow, I became the child who was expected to understand. Dad called me mature. Looking back, mature was simply the word adults used when they wanted a child to accept disappointment quietly. I still remember my high school graduation. I had worked harder than anyone expected. I earned scholarships, academic awards, recognition from teachers. The auditorium was packed that night. Students were celebrating with their families. Parents filled the rows of seats. But one chair stayed empty. My father's. Olivia had a last-minute event for a fashion competition in Savannah. Dad chose to drive there instead. Mom told me not to take it personally. "Your sister really needed support today." I smiled and nodded. Then I cried in the school parking lot after everyone left. That became a pattern. When Olivia struggled, she received attention. When I struggled, I received advice. When Olivia made mistakes, people comforted her. When I succeeded, people assumed I would be fine without recognition. I became the easy child, the understanding child, the low-maintenance child, the child who never caused trouble. What nobody realized was that every time I stayed quiet, something inside me disappeared. Margaret had noticed long before anyone else. She noticed the empty chair at graduation. She noticed the excuses. She noticed how often I defended people who kept letting me down. Now, standing in my wedding dress, she looked at me with sad understanding. "Emily," she said softly, "this did not start today." And deep down, I knew she was right. 5 minutes before my wedding was simply the latest chapter in a story that had been happening my entire life. Margaret Collins entered my life when I was 13 years old. At first, she was simply my school principal, a respected educator, a strong leader, someone every student admired. But over the years, she became something much more important to me. She became the adult who consistently showed up. The first time I noticed the difference was after my graduation ceremony. Most families were taking photos together. Parents hugged their children. Flowers filled the hallways. Meanwhile, I was sitting alone on a bench outside the school, pretending to answer messages on my phone so nobody would notice I was crying. Margaret sat beside me without saying a word. After a few minutes, she handed me a bottle of water. Then she said something I never forgot. A child should never have to pretend an empty chair does not hurt. No one had ever said that to me before. Most people told me to be understanding, to be patient, to think about Olivia. Margaret was the first person who acknowledged that my pain was real. As the years passed, she remained a steady presence in my life. When I applied to college, she wrote one of my recommendation letters. When I doubted myself, she reminded me how far I had already come. When I graduated with a counseling degree, she sat proudly in the audience. My father missed that ceremony too. He was helping Olivia prepare for a major business launch. Margaret never criticized him directly. She never filled my head with anger. Instead, she taught me something far more valuable. She taught me that disappointment and worth are not the same thing. Just because someone fails to show up for you does not mean you are unworthy of love. Years later, when I became a school counselor, she sent me a handwritten note. I still kept it in my desk drawer. It said, "The children who feel invisible will know that you see them." That note carried me through some difficult days. Now, standing in my wedding dress, I looked at the woman who had spent nearly 2 decades proving that love is measured by consistency, not biology. My hands were still shaking. My heart still hurt. But Margaret stepped closer and gently squeezed my shoulder. "Emily," she said, "your father's choices today do not define your value." I wanted to believe her. More than anything, I wanted to believe her. Because in a few minutes, I would have to decide whether I was going to let my family's behavior ruin the most important day of my life. I took a deep breath and picked at my bouquet. The shaking had mostly stopped, but the ache in my chest remained. Outside the bridal suite, guests were settling into their seats. The ceremony would begin soon. Ryan was waiting. The future I had spent years building was waiting. But first, I needed answers. Margaret walked beside me as I stepped into the hallway. The historic venue was beautiful. Soft lighting glowed against exposed brick walls. Fresh flowers lined the entrance. Normally, it would have felt warm and inviting. Instead, it felt like a battlefield. Halfway down the corridor, I saw Olivia. She was leaning against the wall in her champagne-colored bridesmaid dress, scrolling through her phone as if nothing unusual had happened. When she noticed me approaching, a small smile appeared. "There she is." I stopped several feet away. "Where is Dad?" She slipped her phone into her purse. "You already know the answer."
No.
I said firmly. "I want to hear it from you." Her smile widened. "Dad is with me." "Why?" "Because I asked him to be."
Iserte her.
"You asked him to miss my wedding," she shrugged. "I asked him to support the daughter, who actually needed him today." The words landed like a slap. "Needed him," Olivia laughed.
Come on, Emily.
"You always act like everything is so unfair. You have the perfect fiancé, a stable career, friends who adore you. Everyone loves your sweet little counselor image. People notice you plenty." For the first time, I saw it clearly. This was not about Dad. Not really. This was about attention. Olivia had spent her entire life measuring love by comparison. If someone praised me, she needed more praise. If someone celebrated me, she needed a bigger celebration. Sharing the spotlight felt like losing. "This is my wedding day," I said quietly. "And somehow that still is not enough for you." Her expression hardened. "Maybe because everyone keeps acting like you are some kind of saint. You have no idea what it feels like to be overlooked." I almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. Overlooked. That was the story of my entire childhood. No, Olivia, I said. I know exactly what that feels like. For a moment, something flashed across her face. Not guilt, not regret.
Fear.
Because for the first time, I was not backing down. For the first time, I was not making excuses for her behavior. And I think she realized that whatever happened next, she was losing control of the story she had spent years writing. Before I could say anything else, I heard hurried footsteps at the far end of the hallway. My mother appeared moments later. Diane Parker looked exhausted. Her eyes were red. Her mascara was slightly smeared. The moment she reached us, she grabbed my hands. Emily, please. Not here. Not today.
Især her.
The question that had been growing inside me suddenly became impossible to ignore. Did you know Mom froze? That tiny pause told me everything. My stomach dropped. You knew Dad was not coming. Emily, she whispered, it was complicated. I pulled my hands away. Did you know tears filled her eyes? I thought he would change his mind. I thought he would come before the ceremony. The hallway seemed to spin. So while I was getting ready, while I was taking pictures, while I was sitting in that bridal suite waiting for my father, you already knew. Mom looked down. I did not know what to say. The betrayal felt different from Olivia's. Olivia had always been selfish. That part was predictable. But my mother had watched it happen. She had known. And she had said nothing. Olivia crossed her arms. See, this is exactly what I mean. Everything becomes a crisis with her. I turned toward her.
No.
The crisis happened when my own family decided I did not deserve the truth. For once, Olivia had no immediate comeback. Then another voice interrupted.
Emily.
I knew that voice instantly. My entire body went still. Slowly, I turned. My father stood near the side entrance. Robert Parker looked older than he had that morning. His shoulders seemed heavier. His face was pale. And for the first time in my life, he looked uncertain. Dad. The word felt strange in my mouth. Olivia immediately stepped toward him. Dad, what are you doing here? The question revealed more than she intended. Because nobody asks that question unless they expected someone to stay away. Dad ignored her. His eyes stayed fixed on me. Emily, I need to talk to you. I laughed once. A short, painful laugh. 5 minutes before my wedding, that is, when you decide we should talk. His face tightened. I know you are angry. Angry, I shook my head. You let me believe you were not coming. You let me sit there wondering why my own father had abandoned me on my wedding day. The hallway fell silent. For the first time all morning, nobody rushed to rescue Olivia. Nobody changed the subject. Nobody told me to be understanding. Because everyone standing there knew one thing. My father finally had to answer for choices he had spent years avoiding. My father opened his mouth, but for several seconds, no words came out. It was almost painful to watch. Not because I felt sorry for him. Because I had spent years waiting for this conversation. Years waiting for him to explain why I always seemed to come second. Finally, he rubbed his forehead and sighed. Olivia was upset. I stared at him. That is your explanation. His shoulders slumped. She felt like she was losing her place in the family. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. So, your solution was to make sure I lost mine, Emily?
No.
I raised my hand. For once, I was not going to let him smooth things over. For once, I needed him to hear me. My entire childhood, whenever Olivia was upset, everyone stopped what they were doing to make her feel better. When she was angry, people comforted her. When she demanded attention, people gave it to her. And every single time, I was expected to understand. Dad looked away. That is not fair. Really, I took a step closer. Do you remember my scholarship ceremony? Silence. Do you remember my counseling school graduation? More silence. Do you remember my first day working as a counselor? His face tightened. I knew the answer before he spoke.
No.
Because while I remembered every disappointment, he could barely remember the events themselves. Olivia suddenly stepped forward. This is ridiculous. Dad was doing his best. No, I said calmly. He was doing what was easiest. The hallway became completely still. Even my mother stopped crying. Dad looked wounded. I never meant to hurt you. That was the problem. People always think pain only matters when it is intentional, but neglect leaves scars too. You kept telling yourself I was strong enough to handle disappointment. You kept assuming I would understand. And eventually, understanding became an excuse for abandoning me. His eyes filled with regret. For the first time, I saw genuine shame on his face. Beside me, Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was calm but firm. Robert, peace is not achieved by asking one child to absorb all the pain so another child never feels uncomfortable. Dad lowered his head. She continued, that is not peace. That is favoritism. The word landed heavily in the hallway. Nobody argued. Nobody denied it. Because everyone standing there knew it was true. For years, my family had called it understanding, compromise,
Keeping the peace.
but standing there on my wedding day, I finally saw it for what it had always been. Favoritism wrapped in nicer words. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The hallway felt suspended in time. My father stood in front of me looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Not because he lacked authority, because the truth had finally caught up with him. Then, he took a step forward. Emily, let me make this right. I laughed softly. Make it right how? By pretending none of this happened. His face tightened.
Please.
Let me walk you down the aisle. The words hit harder than I expected. For years, that moment had lived in my imagination. I had pictured my father standing beside me. I had imagined his arm linked with mine. I had imagined feeling chosen, protected,
Loved. A younger version of me still wanted that.
A younger version of me desperately wanted to say yes. But standing there, I realized something important. He was not offering because he had.
Protected me.
He was offering because people were about to notice that he had not. There is a difference. I looked directly into his eyes.
No.
The hallway went silent. My mother's mouth fell open. Olivia blinked in shock. Even my father seemed unable to process what he had heard. What do you mean no? I took a slow breath. You do not get to disappear when I need you most, and then show up at the last minute expecting everything to be fixed. Emily.
No, Dad.
My voice remained calm. That was what surprised everyone. I was not yelling. I was not crying. I was simply done making excuses. Being my father is not something you perform when people are watching. It is something you do consistently.
And today you failed.
The words hurt me as much as they hurt him. But they were true. For the first time in my life, I was saying the things I usually swallowed. Dad's eyes filled with tears. Please do not do this.
Do not embarrass me.
That sentence changed everything. Not because it was cruel. Because it revealed what still mattered most to him. His image. His reputation. His comfort. I looked away from him and toward Margaret. She stood quietly beside me, never demanding attention, never asking for recognition, just showing up year after year. When our eyes met, she looked confused, as if she had no idea what I was about to say. I smiled through the emotion building in my chest. Margaret, would you walk me down the aisle? Her eyes immediately filled with tears. For a moment, Margaret simply stared at me. Emily, are you sure? Her voice trembled. I nodded, more sure than I have ever been about anything. Tears filled her eyes immediately. She pressed a hand against her chest and looked away for a second, trying to compose herself. Then she smiled. It was not a dramatic smile, not a victorious smile, just the smile of someone who genuinely loved another person and never expected anything in return. I would be honored. Behind me, I heard my mother begin crying again. My father lowered his head. Olivia looked furious. But for the first time, their reactions no longer controlled my decisions. The wedding coordinator appeared at the end of the hallway. Emily, we need to begin. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. Margaret carefully offered her arm. My hand trembled as I placed mine through it. Not because I was uncertain, because I finally understood what this moment meant. Family is not always the people who share your last name. Sometimes family is the person who stays when everyone else leaves. The music began. Soft piano notes drifted through the venue. The large wooden doors slowly opened. Warm sunlight streamed through the historic library windows. Guests rose from their seats. Dozens of faces turned toward the entrance. For a brief second, confusion spread across the room. People noticed immediately. My father was not beside me. Margaret was. Whispers moved through the crowd. Questions formed. But none of that mattered, because the only person I cared about was standing at the altar. Ryan. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. His eyes moved from Margaret to me. Then understanding appeared. He did not look confused. He did not look embarrassed. He simply looked concerned. Concerned for me. Concerned about what had happened. And somehow, that made me love him even more. Margaret squeezed my arm gently. "Keep your eyes forward," she whispered. So I did. Step by step, we moved down the aisle. With every step, years of disappointment seemed to fall behind me. When we finally reached the altar, Margaret placed my hand into Ryan's. Then she leaned close and whispered something I will never forget. "You were never difficult to love." The tears I had been holding back all morning finally filled my eyes. Ryan squeezed my hand, and for the first time that day, I felt safe. The officiant smiled warmly and began the ceremony. For a few minutes, everything felt almost normal. The room settled. The whispers faded. The attention shifted away from my family and back to the reason everyone had gathered there. Ryan and me. I held his hands tightly. He rubbed his thumb across my knuckles, a small gesture that somehow calmed the storm still swirling inside me. Then it was time for the vows. Ryan went first. His voice was steady, confident, the kind of voice that always made me feel like I could breathe easier. "Emily," he said, "before I met you, I thought strength meant handling everything alone. Then I met a woman who carried more disappointment than most people could imagine, and somehow still chose kindness." My eyes immediately filled with tears. Ryan smiled softly. "You spend your days helping children who feel invisible. You sit with people during their hardest moments and remind them they matter. You never ask for recognition. You never demand attention. But today, I want everyone in this room to know exactly who you are. You are compassionate. You are brave. And you are the person I want beside me for the rest of my life." Several guests wiped away tears, including me. Then it was my turn. I looked at Ryan. Then I looked around the room. For years, I had believed love worked like a competition. You earned it, protected it, fought for it. And if someone loved another person more, there was simply less left for you. My family had taught me that lesson repeatedly. But Ryan had taught me something different. I took a slow breath. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet enough, patient enough, and understanding enough, people would eventually choose me. But real love does not work that way. Real love does not make you compete for a place in someone's heart. Real love does not ask you to shrink so someone else can feel bigger. Real love shows up. It tells the truth. And it protects your dignity when nobody is watching. Ryan's eyes filled with emotion. Mine did too. At that moment, I realized something important. This wedding was never about being chosen by my father. It was about recognizing the people who had already chosen me long ago. And standing beside Ryan, I finally understood the difference. I thought the hardest part of the day was over. The vows were finished. The rings had been exchanged. For the first time all morning, I felt something close to peace. Then a voice broke through the silence. "Emily." My entire body froze. I knew that voice. Slowly I turned. My father was standing near the back row. One hand rested on the back of a chair. His face was pale. His eyes were red. The room fell completely silent. Guests exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody knew what was happening. Not yet. Dad swallowed hard. Then he looked directly at me. "I failed my daughter today." A murmur spread through the room. Even the officiant looked surprised. Dad continued. "No, not just today. For years." My chest tightened. I had imagined hearing those words countless times. Yet now that they were finally being spoken, they felt heavier than I expected. I kept listening. I convinced myself that Emily was strong enough to handle disappointment. I told myself she understood. I told myself she needed me less than Olivia did. His voice cracked. The truth is that I used her strength as an excuse. The room was completely still. My mother covered her mouth. Several guests looked stunned. For the first time, my father was saying out loud what everyone had quietly ignored for years. I let one daughter demand all my attention while expecting the other daughter to accept whatever was left. That was wrong. Olivia suddenly stood up. Dad, stop. Her voice was sharp,
Desperate.
but he did not stop. He looked at her sadly.
No, Olivia.
I should have said this a long time ago. She stared at him in disbelief, as if she had never imagined a world where he would not protect her. You are choosing her over me. The accusation hung in the air. For years, that sentence had controlled our family. Dad looked exhausted.
No.
I am choosing the truth. The words landed like thunder. Olivia's face drained of color. For the first time, nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody rushed to explain her behavior. Nobody rushed to blame me. The room had finally seen what I had lived with for decades. I looked at my father. Part of me felt relieved. Part of me felt sad. But mostly, I felt something unexpected.
Free.
Because the truth was finally standing in the open where everyone could see it. After the ceremony, Ryan and I walked back down the aisle together. Guests stood and applauded. Some were smiling. Some were crying. Others looked stunned by what they had just witnessed. But for the first time all day, I felt lighter. The truth was no longer hidden. The truth belonged to everyone now. Outside, the reception was already underway. String lights glowed above the courtyard. Soft music played in the background. Guests gathered around beautifully decorated tables. For a little while, I allowed myself to enjoy it. Ryan stayed close beside me. Margaret was surrounded by guests thanking her for what she had done. Even seeing that brought tears to my eyes. She looked uncomfortable with the attention. That was exactly why she deserved it. People who do the right thing rarely do it for applause. Unfortunately, not everyone was ready to move forward. Olivia stood near the edge of the courtyard speaking angrily to our parents. Even from a distance, I could tell she was losing control. Her hands moved wildly as she spoke. Her voice grew louder. Then suddenly, everyone heard her. You embarrassed me. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. My father looked exhausted.
No, Olivia.
You embarrassed yourself. The courtyard became silent. Olivia stared at him in disbelief. How can you say that after everything I have done for this family? Dad shook his head. This is exactly the problem. Everything always becomes about you. Her face turned red. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Several people clearly wished they were somewhere else. But nobody looked away. Years of family dynamics were finally unfolding in public. You chose her. Olivia accused. Dad sighed heavily.
No.
I finally stopped choosing sides. For a moment, Olivia looked completely lost. Then she turned toward the crowd, toward the guests, toward the people she hoped would support her. Instead, she found silence. One woman who worked in event planning spoke carefully. Is it true that you called Emily before the ceremony and told her father was not coming? Olivia immediately became defensive. That is not what happened. Then what happened? Another guest asked. Olivia opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. But no explanation sounded reasonable anymore. Because there was no reasonable explanation. She had wanted attention, and she had been willing to ruin someone else's wedding to get it. Finally, the venue manager stepped forward. His voice remained professional. Miss Parker, I think it would be best if you left for the evening. The words stunned her. She looked at Dad, waiting,
Hoping.
expecting him to rescue her one more
Time.
But he never moved. And in that moment, she realized the protection she had depended on her entire life was finally gone. Later that evening, after the first dance and after Ryan and I finally managed to eat a few bites of dinner, my father approached our table. The reception had settled into a quieter rhythm. Guests were laughing. Music filled the courtyard. For the first time all day, things felt peaceful. Dad stopped a few feet away. He did not immediately speak. He simply stood there, looking older than I had ever seen him. Eventually, he cleared his throat.
Emily.
I looked up. His eyes were full of regret. Not embarrassment. Not frustration. Regret. I see it now. The words were quiet, almost fragile. I thought about everything that had happened. The missed events, the broken promises, the years of disappointment, the wedding day he nearly missed. Part of me wanted to forgive him instantly, not because he deserved it, because daughters never completely stop wanting their fathers, no matter how many times they are disappointed. But I had spent too much of my life confusing forgiveness with the absence of boundaries. I would not make that mistake again. If you want a relationship with me, I said calmly, it has to be different. Dad nodded immediately. I know. You cannot call my pain dramatic when it makes you uncomfortable. You cannot ask me to stay quiet so everyone else feels better. And you cannot expect one apology to repair years of damage. His eyes filled with tears. You are right. For once, there was no argument.
No excuses.
No blaming someone else. Just acceptance. A few minutes later, Mom joined us. She apologized too. Not for choosing favorites, but for staying silent. For watching things happen and convincing herself that avoiding conflict was the same thing as solving it. I hugged her, because accountability and punishment are not the same thing. Sometimes people need truth more than they need anger. As the evening continued, Margaret stood to give a toast. The courtyard became quiet. She raised her glass and smiled. Every child deserves adults who show up. Every child deserves to know they matter. And every adult should remember that love is not proven through words. It is proven through consistency. The guests applauded. Ryan squeezed my hand. I looked around at the people gathered under the lights. Some were family. Some were friends. Some had entered my life through unexpected paths. But all of them shared something important. They had shown up. That was the lesson I carried home from my wedding day. Family is not measured by blood alone. It is measured by actions, by loyalty, by honesty, by who stands beside you when there is nothing to gain. Olivia tried to turn my wedding into a story about rejection. Instead, it became a story about truth. My father finally faced the consequences of his choices. My mother finally stopped hiding behind silence. And I finally stopped begging people to choose me. Because real peace begins the moment you stop chasing love from people who only offer it conditionally. That night, as Ryan and I walked beneath the glowing lights together, I realized something beautiful. I was never the daughter left behind. I was simply the daughter who finally learned her worth. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear from you. Have you ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or treated differently within your own family? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments because your story might help someone else feel less alone. And remember, being kind does not mean accepting disrespect. Setting healthy boundaries is not selfish.
It is self-respect.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who may need this reminder today. Thank you for spending this time with us, and we will see you in the next story.